know about is the fact that your bobbin thread needs to actually come up off of the plate and be on the top side here with you. So it actually comes through this tiny little hole, but you don't have to do anything about that. You thread the thread through the presser foot because you're going to want the needle and the thread to come down into that hole together. And what you're going to do is...
Did you say how you're getting the presser foot up and down?
Yeah, I will in a second. So what you want to do is have the crank this wheel around one full rotation. And what's going to happen, I'm going to pull up slightly. And what happens is that the bobbin thread naturally comes up because what you're doing is actually the two threads are looping together to create that stitch. So that's what you need to create the stitching. So that's why the tension is so important, because what it actually is in between those two layers of fabric, you need the stitching to come together in between, exactly in between. If it doesn't come in exactly in between, it ends up being this sort of big, crazy mess that I'm sure everybody has or anyone who's looked at it over the weekend has had. This is a tension problem. All of you will have tension problems. I would just recommend getting, and simply because different fabrics require different tensions. So when you sit down in the machine, have a scrap piece of the fabric you're going to be using, fold it over, run it through a whole bunch of times, and you will be able to correct your tension. And once that's done, you're good to go.
How do you correct tension?
Get there.
Okay.
So you're going to pull out this thread. Mm-hmm. You're going to make sure they're both pretty loose and unencumbered. Now, the presser foot, which is this thing right here, can be pulled up and down in two different ways. There is a lever here that you can lift up and down, and when you lift it up, it stays. When you lift it down, obviously, it stays. But then also in industrial machines, there is this groovy lever here that you engage with your knee. Oh. And that just sort of does it more quickly. I mean, industrial machine is exactly what it's for. It's for using for industrial sewing. They want to do it as quickly as possible. So that is basically all your threading issues. The different things you need to know on the machine. This is your threading tension gauge. You're going to want to turn it to the right to make it to increase tension. You're going to want to turn it to the left to decrease tension. Righty-tighty, loosey-goosey, or lefty-loosey, I think is the old adage. If your thread, so the pink is actually the bobbin thread, and the white was my top stitch thread that I did this morning. So you can see here that it is all loose. It's because my top thread was not tight enough, and you can just pull it out. So you really do need that good tension, because otherwise this won't hold anything. And you do that by turning it, and that's what I did. You know, I'd turn it here, and nope, that's not right. I turned it back and forth, and I just kept turning and turning and turning until I got the tension that I liked. And then what the tension is, and you can kind of see on this stitch, is that it's right in the center, and you can kind of pull it apart, and you can see that it is that link that happens right in the middle. This lever here is your stitch length. The smaller the stitch, the smaller the number, the smaller the stitch. The bigger the number, the bigger the stitch. And what you see here is the two different sort of examples of that. That is obviously a smaller stitch and a larger stitch. There really is no difference between a smaller and larger stitch. People often feel that a smaller stitch is a more elegant stitch. I happen to personally agree. Also, when there is a smaller stitch, it also, because you've looped your threads now more times, it does give you a little additional strength, which might help. But it is a little harder to use, so a bigger stitch is a little bit easier for people who don't know how to sew right away. So when you're sewing,